The Forgotten Story of Black Jesus, Why It Matters. Today, the story of Jesus Christ is one that transcends borders, languages, and eras. His teachings have shaped entire civilizations, inspired billions, and continue to provide comfort and hope to countless people. Yet one vital part of Jesus' identity has often been overlooked or erased: his African heritage for centuries. Western cultures have portrayed Jesus as a fair-skinned, blue-eyed figure in religious art and imagery. But this depiction is far removed from the historical and geographical reality of who Jesus was. The notion that Jesus may have had African lineage is not new, but it has been buried beneath centuries of cultural and theological suppression. To question the common portrayal of Jesus as a white man is to challenge held beliefs, but to ignore the possibility of a black Jesus is to erase a crucial aspect of his story, a story that has the power to reshape how we think about race, identity, and faith in today's world. In a time where conversations about racial justice, identity, and inclusion are more important than ever, rediscovering the African identity of Jesus holds profound significance. What does it mean for this part of Jesus' identity to have been forgotten? And why is its restoration so vital today to find the answers? We must explore early. Historical records confront the deliberate erasure of this narrative and recognize the pressing need to reclaim this truth. If you're moved by these questions and eager to learn more, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content, and don't forget to leave your thoughts and comments below. We'd love to hear from you, tracing the African roots of Jesus to rediscovering a forgotten legacy, to uncover the forgotten story of Black Jesus. We must first look at the historical and biblical records that point to his African connections. Born in Bethlehem and Rome, and occupied Judea, Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew with roots in a region that connected three continents to Africa, Asia, and Europe. Judea's location at the crossroads of these lands made it a melting pot of cultures and peoples in ancient times. Racial categories as we know them today didn't exist in such rigid forms. The ancient world embraced a broader understanding of ethnic diversity. This context of cultural exchange allows us to explore Jesus' connections to Africa more deeply. One of the clearest links to Africa in Jesus' life comes from the Gospel of Matthew, where his family fled to Egypt to escape King Herod's deadly decree. After being warned in a dream, Joseph took Mary and the infant Jesus to Egypt for safety. Egypt, a North African country, had long been a place of refuge for the Jewish people, especially during times of persecution, such as the Babylonian exile. This flight to Egypt not only marks a pivotal moment in Jesus' early life, but also symbolizes his family's deep connection to the Chotel, African continent. It's no coincidence that Africa was a place of safety and salvation for Jesus, continuing a long tradition of African lands offering refuge in times of need. Jesus' family's escape to Egypt tells us something important. Egypt was a land populated by dark-skinned people of African descent, and the fact that Mary, Joseph, and Jesus blended into this society suggests that they shared similar physical traits. If they had looked significantly different from the locals, they likely would have drawn unwanted attention. This detail hints that Jesus and his family likely had more African features than the whitewashed images commonly portrayed in Western art. Early Christian art and iconography in Africa further support this African connection. In places like Egypt and Ethiopia, ancient depictions of Jesus show him with dark skin, woolly hair, and distinctly African facial features. The Coptic Christians of Egypt, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, consistently portrayed Jesus in ways that reflected their own ethnic identity. These representations weren't limited to Egypt alone. In Ethiopia, where Christianity dates back to the 4th century, Jesus has long been depicted as having African roots, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. A deeply historical Christian tradition maintains to this day that Jesus had African ancestry. This belief has shaped the faith and identity of Ethiopian Christians for centuries, offering a powerful image of a Jesus who represents them. Another important African figure in Jesus' life is Simon of Cyrene, who, according to the Gospels, helped Jesus carry his cross on the way to the crucifixion. Simon was from Cyrene, a city in modern-day Libya, North Africa. He was likely a dark-skinned African man in Jerusalem. To celebrate Passover, his role in assisting Jesus in his final moments highlights the deep ties between African and Jewish communities. During this time, Simon's presence in such a pivotal moment serves as a reminder of the African influence on the story of Jesus. While these accounts may not offer definitive proof of Jesus' African heritage, they challenge the long-standing portrayal of a white Jesus that has dominated Western culture, from Renaissance art to modern media. Depictions of Jesus have often reflected European ideal, erasing the ethnic diversity that surrounded his life. These images of a fair-skinned, blue-eyed Jesus aligned with European colonial ambitions, reinforcing a narrative of Christian superiority and white dominance. This version of Jesus, however, is far removed from the historical reality of his life, despite centuries of suppression. The idea of a black Jesus has not been lost across Africa and among people of African descent. The understanding of Jesus' African roots has endured for many. Jesus is not just a symbol of divine love and sacrifice, but also a reflection of their own ethnic and cultural identity. The historical and spiritual ties between Africa and the life of Jesus are celebrated in African Christian traditions, art, and theology, reminding us that Jesus' story is deeply intertwined with Africa's rich heritage. In conclusion, while the African identity of Jesus may not be widely accepted, the evidence from biblical accounts, ancient migrations, and early Christian art suggests that his connection to Africa runs deep. His connections allow us to reclaim a more authentic and inclusive understanding of Jesus, one that honors the diversity of the ancient world and challenges the racialized images that have shaped Christianity for centuries. By tracing these African roots, we rediscover a Jesus who belongs to all of humanity, transcending the divisions of race and ethnicity that persist today. The deliberate arrure of Black Jesus, why it happened and why it matters. The erasure of Jesus. African identity was not an accident. It was intentional, driven by cultural, political, and theological forces. As Christianity spread through Europe, in the early centuries, it became tied to imperial power and eventually colonial expansion. European rulers, especially during the Middle Ages and Renaissance, sought to blend their political ambitions with religious authority. By promoting an image of Jesus that reflected their own ethnicity, they found a way to consolidate their power and legitimize their authority. A white European-looking Jesus served this purpose perfectly. It reinforced the idea of European supremacy, reshaping the religious narrative to fit the social and political structures of the time. One of the key moments in this transformation happened during the reign of Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. After his conversion to Christianity, Constantine declared it the official religion of the Roman Empire, merging political unity with spiritual power. The Council of Nicea in 325 AD was pivotal in shaping Christian doctrines, and this is when the shift in Jesus' image toward European ideals began. Artists influenced by Greco-Roman standards of beauty started portraying Jesus with fair skin, straight hair, and European features. This wasn't just an artistic choice, it was a deliberate decision, aligned with the cultural and political goals of the Roman Empire. A white Jesus became the face of European Christianity, slowly erasing his true Middle Eastern and African roots as European colonialism spread the white image of Jesus across the Atlantic. In the Americas, European colonizers used this image as a tool to justify their conquest and subjugation of indigenous and African peoples. A white Jesus symbolized divine authority, and this idea was used to rationalize the systemic oppression of known and white populations. Missionaries presented this wash image to African and indigenous peoples, reinforcing racial hierarchies and promoting the idea that whiteness was synonymous with spiritual superiority. This deliberate whitewashing was further entrenched by theologians who either ignored or downplayed the African connections in Jesus' life. By the time of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, the image of a white Jesus had become so deeply embedded in Christian thought that any suggestion of a black or African Jesus was dismissed as irrelevant or even heretical. Even though the Reformation brought changes to Christian practice, it did little to challenge the racialized image of Jesus. This distortion of Jesus's identity had far-reaching consequences. It shaped the way race and identity were understood within Christian theology. By portraying Jesus as white European Christians, reinforced the belief that whiteness linked to divinity and moral purity. While non-white people were marginalized, this belief system helped justify slavery, colonialism, and later racial segregation. The white Jesus became a symbol of power, and superiority, reinforcing systems of oppression that harmed African and indigenous peoples for centuries. Religious leaders and political rulers worked together to maintain these racial hierarchies, using the image of a white Jesus to uphold social control. Meanwhile, the African connections to Jesus, such as his family's flight to Egypt or the role of Simon of Cyrene, were downplayed or reinterpreted to fit a Eurocentric narrative over the idea that Jesus could have looked like the people of the Middle East or North Africa was overshadowed by European depictions. This distorted image not only reinforced racial divisions, but also reshaped the spiritual understanding of Christianity. The implications of this historical erasure are profound. By promoting a white Jesus, the Church helped create a worldview where non-white people were seen as inferior. This belief system became the foundation for racist ideologies that justified exploitation, slavery, and colonization. The image of a white Jesus supported the development of systems of oppression that dehumanized African, indigenous, and other non-European peoples. The deliberately allure of black Jesus also shaped Western Christianity's theology by aligning Jesus with European identity. The Church suggested that whiteness was closer to godliness, pushing African-descended peoples to the margins. This contributed to the long-standing dehumanization of non-white communities and justified policies that enforced racial inequality today. Scholars and theologians are challenging this historical distortion by re-examining biblical texts, historical records, and early Christian art. They are working to reclaim Jesus' African identity. This isn't just about correcting historical inaccuracies. It's about addressing the deep racial injustices that have been perpetuated in the name of Jesus for centuries. Restoring Jesus' African roots is a step toward dismantling the harmful belief that divinity is tied to whiteness, and it promotes a more inclusive, just vision of Christian faith for African and African-descended Christians. Reclaiming the image of black Jesus is a powerful act of empowerment. For too long, they have been disconnected from a version of Jesus that reflects their own racial and cultural identity. By recovering the African aspects of Jesus' life, they can reconnect with a version of their faith that honors their heritage. This reclamation is not only an act of historical justice, but also a reminder that Jesus' message of love, equality, and justice transcends race and culture. In conclusion, the deliberate erasure of black Jesus was a calculated effort to reshape Christianity to align with European political and racial agendas. This process distorted the image of Jesus and contributed to the development of racist ideologies that have had lasting effects on both Christian theology and society. Reclaiming Jesus' African identity is a crucial step toward healing the racial divisions that have been perpetuated by this whitewashing. It challenges the long-standing association between whiteness and divinity and offers a more inclusive and accurate vision of Jesus for believers of all races and cultures. Black Jesus and the struggle for racial justice. Why it matters now in today's world. The forgotten story of Black Jesus holds immense significance, especially in the fight for racial justice, identity, and equality. As the legacies of racism, colonialism, and white supremacy continue to shape societies, the image of a Black Jesus challenges deep-rooted ideas about power and privilege. Reclaiming this image offers a chance to reimagine how religion can be a force for healing, solidarity, and justice in a world still grappling with historical injustices. For many African Americans, the image of a white Jesus has been a source of pain and alienation. During slavery, millions of Africans were forcibly converted to Christianity not out of concern for their spiritual well-being, but as a way to control them. White Jesus was portrayed as the embodiment of their oppressor religion, reinforcing the idea that whiteness was linked to godliness, authority, and superiority. Enslaved Africans were expected to worship a deity who looked like their enslavers, creating a painful contradiction. The message of liberation found in the Gospels was overshadowed by a figure that symbolized white supremacy. Even after slavery ended, the image of a white Jesus persisted in Black churches, shaping how many African Americans related to their faith. This portrayal created a disconnect between the liberating teachings of Jesus and the lived experiences of African Americans. Many were left wondering how to reconcile their faith in a Savior who preached justice for the oppressed with a whitewashed figure used to justify oppression. This dissonance sparked a desire to reclaim Jesus in a way that resonated with their own experiences and identity. In recent years, the movement to reclaim Black Jesus has gained momentum. Theologians, pastors, and activists, particularly within movements like Black Lives Matter, emphasize the importance of Black Jesus in affirming Black dignity and humanity in the face of systemic racism and violence. Black Jesus is not just a figure from history. He stands as a powerful symbol of resistance to oppression, embodying the struggles of the poor, marginalized, and oppressed. The life of Jesus is told in the Gospels, reflects the story of someone born into poverty, living under Roman occupation, and ultimately executed for challenging injustice for many African Americans and people of color. This story resonates deeply with their own experiences of racial oppression, police violence, and economic exploitation. The image of Black Jesus also critiques systemic racism and white supremacy within both religious and secular institutions. By reclaiming Jesus as a man of African descent, theologians and activists challenge the association between Christianity and whiteness that has dominated Western thought for centuries. In this sense, Black Jesus becomes a radical symbol of justice and equality, reminding us that God's love and liberation extend to all people, regardless of race or ethnicity. In contrast to the whitewashed depictions of Jesus that have long dominated churches and religious art, Black Jesus calls us to reimagine Christianity as a faith that defends the oppressed and stands against all forms of racial and social injustice. This reclamation also impacts the broader conversation about race and identity within the church. Multiracial and African American congregations are rethinking traditional portrayals of Jesus, recognizing that these depictions are not neutral, but reflect centuries of racial bias. By embracing Black Jesus, these communities are affirming their own identities and experiences while also challenging the narratives that have excluded them. This shift is part of a larger movement to reflect the global diversity of Christianity, acknowledging that Jesus' message transcends racial, cultural, and ethnic boundaries outside of religious institutions. Black Jesus has become a potent symbol in the fight for racial justice movements, like Black Lives Matter, have drawn on the image of Black Jesus as a figure who resists state-sanctioned violence and oppression in protest speeches and art. Black Jesus is invoked as a reminder that the fight for racial equality is not just a political battle, but a spiritual one. The parallels between Jesus' life and the lives of people of color, F.A. injustice today are striking. Like Jesus, many are subjected to violence, dehumanization, and oppression at the hands of the state. The story of Black Jesus also challenges Christians to confront how religion has been used to justify inequality. It asks believers to reflect on how they see Jesus and what those perceptions reveal about their views on race, power, and privilege. If Jesus is seen as a figure of divine authority who is white, what does that say about the ways white supremacy has shaped religious thought? But if Jesus is understood as a person of color oppressed by the political and religious authorities of his time, how might that change how we think about justice inequality today for those committed to racial justice? Black Jesus offers a hopeful vision of a world where all people are seen as equal in the eyes of God. He calls believers to a deeper understanding of the gospel, one that emphasizes solidarity with the marginalized. In this vision, Black Jesus is not just a historical figure, but a living symbol of God's commitment to justice, liberation, and human dignity. In conclusion, the relevance of Black Jesus today lies in how he challenges deeply ingrained ideas about race, identity, and justice. In a world still shaped by the legacies of racism, reclaiming Black Jesuses is a powerful act of resistance, reminding us that the struggle for racial justice is both spiritual and political. Through this reclamation, theologians, activists, and believers are offering a new understanding of Christianity, one that centers the experiences of the oppressed and calls for a more just and inclusive world, restoring the forgotten story of Black Jesus, a path to truth and justice. The story of Black Jesus is one that has been neglected, erased, and deliberately silenced for far too long. But now, as we confront the painful legacies of racism, colonialism, and white supremacy, this forgotten narrative demands to be brought back into the light. The image of Black Jesus, long overshadowed by whitewashed depictions, offers a profound reminder of the diversity and inclusiveness that lies at the heart of the Christian message. Restoring this story is not just an academic exercise, it is a spiritual and moral imperative in our ongoing pursuit of justice, equality, and truth. Reclaiming the story of Black Jesus means confronting a narrative that was intentionally marginalized, one that challenges centuries of Eurocentric dominance in art, theology, and culture. The whitewashing of Jesus was not simply a stylistic choice. It was a deliberate act linked to colonial and imperial power structures that sought to legitimize domination and oppression. Acknowledging the African roots of Jesus, his identity as a Middle Eastern Jew in a multicultural, ethnically diverse ancient world, becomes a radical act of truth-telling. It shakes the foundations of systems that have long perpetuated racial inequality by restoring. In the image of Black Jesus, we do more than correct historical inaccuracies. We affirm the dignity and humanity of Black people, both historically and today. Black Jesus stands as a symbol of resistance to oppression, living in solidarity with the marginalized, the poor, and the outcast. Recognizing his African heritage brings into sharp focus the deep connections between the Christian faith and the African continent. Connections that have too often been erased by Western narratives. This reclamation forces us to confront the theological and cultural systems that have been used to justify racism. It asked Christians and people of faith to examine how their religious traditions have been co-opted to support inequality for centuries. The image of a white Jesus was weaponized to justify colonialism, slavery, and segregation, portraying whiteness as synonymous with divinity and authority. Restoring Black Jesus disrupts this false narrative and reclaims the liberating message at the heart of the gospel. A message that stands with the oppressed and calls for justice. Ultimately, the story of Black Jesus matters because it touches the core of what it means to be human. Jesus did not come for the powerful and privileged, but for the marginalized, the oppressed, and those cast aside by society. He lived as an outcast, was persecuted by the authorities, and stood with those denied their dignity and humanities. The story of Black Jesus is at its essence a story of liberation, one that challenges systems of power and offers hope to those who have been silenced. In remembering Black Jesus, we remember the fullness of a faith that has the power to heal, transform, and unite people across all boundaries of race and ethnicity. This act of remembrance is not just about correcting history, it is about reclaiming the true essence of Christianity, a vision of a just, inclusive, and loving world where all are seen as equal in the eyes of God. Black Jesus is not merely a figure from history, he is a symbol of the ongoing struggle for justice, a beacon of hope for the oppressed, and a reminder that dismantling racism is a sacred calling for all who believe in justice. As we seek to restore the story of Black Jesus, we must also recognize its broader implications for how we see ourselves. In our world, this is not just about historical correction. It is about spiritual renewal. To remember Black Jesus is to remember the radical love, justice, and compassion he embodied. It is to embrace a faith that transcends racial, ethnic, and cultural divides, offering a vision of unity, healing, and reconciliation in restoring the story of Black Jesus. We are not simply looking back, we are being invited to create a more just and equitable future